here we are with the next Autonomous Humanity podcast, whatever number it may be. I think 23, 24. Really kind of beside the point. Here to talk about a few recent events that have happened. Really, Jimmy Kimmel getting fired with remarks about Charlie Kirk. Want to touch on Charlie Kirk, some of the points that he's made and campaigned for. And then lastly, kind of wrapping up with Israel. And again, this all kind of goes hand in hand. But without further ado, let's go ahead and watch this first Jimmy Kimmel clip.
The second largest city in our bitterly divided nation, where, like the rest of the country, we're still trying to wrap our heads around the senseless murder of the popular podcaster and conservative activist Charlie Kirk yesterday, whose death has amplified our anger, our differences. And I've seen a lot of extraordinarily vile responses to this from both sides of the political spectrum. Some people are cheering this, which is something I won't ever understand. We had another school shooting yesterday in Colorado, the 100th one of the year. And with all these terrible things happening, you would think that our president will at least make an attempt to bring us together, but he didn't. President Obama did. President Biden did. Presidents Bush and Clinton did. President Trump did not. Instead, he blamed Democrats for their rhetoric. The man who told a crowd of supporters that maybe the Second Amendment people should do something about Hillary Clinton. The man who said he wouldn't mind if someone shot through the fake news media. The man who unleashed a mob on the Capitol and said Liz Cheney should face 9 barrels shooting at her for supporting his opponent blames the radical left for their rhetoric. And then the man who on 9/11, 2001, bragged that his building was now the tallest building in New York, which wasn't even true, by the way, visited the Pentagon for a 9/11 memorial, which, believe it or not, he made a bigly improvement over last year when he showed up at a 9/11 remembrance at a fire station in Lower Manhattan with a 9/11 conspiracy theorist who claims it was an inside job. This year, he brought his wife, which was better for...
I just want to stop it here already and say, if you're trying to make this about Charlie Kirk and remembering the impact that he had and then totally just going into Trump, kind of defeat the purpose. But now, on the other hand, I also see some of the comments made by previous presidents, and not just presidents, but, everyone, it seemed like, and again, everyone is hyperbole, but both in personal social media circles and personal friend circles, you see some celebrities making comments about the Charlie Kirk situation. And of course, it is absolutely horrendous. We should never have someone that is murdered, assassinated over speaking about their ideals, or really any sort of ideals, whether or not they're firmly believed in or not. But I do kind of draw this back to a situation that I lived through back in high school, where there was a kid that died. I forget the exact circumstances around it. But again, not to say that it wasn't an awful situation in both that case of the kid in high school dying and then Charlie Kirk dying. But I think there's a lot of people like, oh, I was best friends with Charlie Kirk, or I was best friends with this kid in high school, just to kind of get some of the clout out of it, where they don't really have those sort of feelings, and it's just virtue signaling. And again, I would much rather people say, hey, I really admired him and, thoughts and prayers and whatever, versus, hey, fuck that guy, But it doesn't have to be one or the other. You don't have to be like, oh my God, Charlie Kirk was our Lord and Savior. And, on the other hand, we don't have to say, oh, Charlie Kirk was, an abhorrent human being and he was just spreading hate and vitriol. And, like most cases, the reality is somewhere in the middle, I think, more often than not. But that's all to say that Jimmy Kimmel being fired, I think, has less to do with the statements made about Charlie Kirk, or as we just listened to, about Trump, and more so along the lines of Jimmy Kimmel doesn't have a show that does ratings, at least on TV. I mean, here we are watching the segment on YouTube, 4.3 million views, and I think the average actual viewership of his show is like 160,000 views. So obviously still much bigger than, any content that we're producing here. So, easy to, point up at the top and say, hey, you suck. And I'm not really saying that, but it's really just a matter of dollars and cents. And I think this is a good out for ABC to say, hey, we're losing $30 million or whatever the case is, just on like Jimmy Kimmel's salary. where Stephen Colbert, along the same lines, was getting paid $40 million, and that show wasn't bringing in $40 million. So I think we're just seeing a course correction, kind of guise as political theater, if you will. And then there was some comments made from Roseanne that I kind of found interesting or humorous, if nothing else. But not to spread the divisive too much, we'll probably just gloss over those. But I do think it was kind of a taste of his own medicine, so to speak, where, kind of cheering on people getting deplatformed to get deplatformed himself. I think, Jimmy Kimmel, he made some funny jokes even later on in this monologue. So, best of luck to him if he goes to do his podcast, independent podcast. I'm sure he'll be fine on his own. But yeah, it's not necessarily censoring free speech, taking him off air. It's just making a business decision that any rational business would make. So that leads me into more of Charlie Kirk, though. So I have watched maybe a total of, at this point, 6 to 8 hours, maybe a little bit more than that, of Charlie Kirk content. Maybe 2-3 hours of that over the last, week or so, just to become a little bit more familiar with his ideals. I previously listened to him on Bill Maher, and I think a couple of his other longer form debates or conversations he's had online. And by and large, I think he's a great influence on not just youth, but just people in general. I think he's built a great business, a great media presence, started to build a great family, and all that got taken away from him. And some of his ideals that he represented absolutely were controversial. However, I think if you actually look at it, more often than not, he was taking what at least I would consider to be the moral high ground. And I do want to get into that a little bit later, the subjectivity and objectivity of morality. But first and foremost, let's go ahead and pull up a clip of his where he's talking about abortion. And I think that's, again, a hot topic issue that I think he has a very good take on. Maybe not the exact take that I have, but we'll cover that post this clip.
And you can vote me out. Give me 1 second. Say the mother gets pregnant and she knows that if she gives birth, she's going to die. She has some kind of health complication. Then what do you do in that case?
Section.
I don't know what that means.
It's a C-section. They do an insert.
Guys, wait, hold on. Just give me 1 second.
They go right below the belly button and they deliver the baby. And after she doesn't have to give birth. It's technically birth, but it's much safer. So that's actually safer than an abortion procedure. Sorry, Lily.
So what I wanted to comment on there is a C-section being safer than abortion is not often looked at as a way to get around abortions being deemed necessary. And I think this is an issue that we've gotten into society where, again, it's almost an extreme where, well, I already have the kid, so do I have to bring it to term, or do I kill it? And I think, the real answer is you don't have reproductive sex. And I think that's the whole misconception of my body, my choice. And I think we can all agree on what I've always heard growing up, where if you're a pregnant woman, you're not supposed to drink alcohol. You're not supposed to smoke cigarettes, right? Because there's another life inside of you. It's not you're just affecting your life. You're going to affect the development of that child while it's in you, as well as, the 18 plus years, afterwards that, at least legally speaking, for those first 18 years, you're responsible for. Now, again, who's to say that you can't put the child up for adoption, put it into foster care? And that's another case that is often argued, well, this baby is not going to have a good life, so therefore let me just give it no life whatsoever. And that was another point that was brought up by Charlie, that I've, not always been in the case of making abortion. I personally don't necessarily think abortion should be illegal, but I wouldn't be opposed to it being illegal. And I don't think like we should be promoting abortion as a form of birth control, as a lot of people seem to think it is. And, just as hey, I made a shitty decision and now let me go take a life as a result of me making a shitty decision. And again, Charlie Kirk kind of framed that up well as, one thing that kind of separates us, or at least idealistically so, here in America, or you can even say in the West, is after you make a poor decision or an evil decision, if you will, you don't double down making another evil decision. You make a better decision. And so let's go ahead to that next clip. Might jump back a little bit, but this still goes hand in hand for another reason why abortion should be illegal, or at least not be the option or decision that's chosen should you have reproductive sex and want to, find out what you're going to do with that kid.
Any case, you don't think there's any case where abortion should be legal?
There's a very, very rare couple cases.
Okay, so you do
where,
think
hold
that
on
a
one
couple
second.
cases
Hold
it
on.
is legal?
If cesarean section is not going to save the mother's life, and the mother's life is actually at risk, which is debated amongst growing numbers of OBGYNs,
Okay.
that is the only case where abortion should be
Do you
allowed.
think there should-
But people say it is a growing consensus in the pro-life world that abortion is never medically necessary.
Okay, so if you had a daughter and she was 10 and she got raped, and she was
Well,
going to give
I-
birth
I
and
do
she
have
would
a
no
daughter.
wait oh and she was going to give birth and she was going to live, would you want her to go through that and carry her
Well,
rapist baby?
That's awfully graphic. The
It's
answer-
no, but it's a real life
Okay,
scenario
well,
that happens
calm
to
down.
many
The
people.
answer is yes, the baby would be delivered.
Oh, okay, great.
So at first I was like, no way. But thinking about it, I think Charlie Kirk is absolutely morally right here, that I don't think it should be made illegal to abort that child in the case of rape, right? And I think rape, incest, and life of the mother, given I would need to look more into this, I would have to agree with Charlie Kirk that a C-section in probably almost every case is going to be safer than getting an abortion. And again, you're going to bring the life to term and allow that baby to, develop into a human being that could go on to do God knows what, that wouldn't otherwise have that opportunity should you make the decision on that person's behalf, taking away their rights. So I think as tough of a subject as it is, I think Charlie Kirk brings up a lot of valid points here. And again, not that, anyone else should have the ability to impart their sense of morality on someone else. I hope we could all, come to an agreement that a baby, or, a fetus, which is, essentially Latin for baby, it is just as for lack of a better way to frame it, like just as guaranteed to have rights, even if they were, from this like worst case scenario of a mother raped by a guy, or a woman or young girl in this case raped by a guy, and that child, what now all of a sudden doesn't get a life because of, a decision that this awful guy made, I think, yeah, that's up to you as a family, to make that decision whether or not you want to bring that kid to being. But that was a very powerful statement that Charlie Kirk made in my eyes, that, again, easier to say that when it's not the actual case. But if that were true, and I have no reason to not believe him, I think that is a very morally righteous sort of ground to stand on. And then lastly, this kind of leaves the abortion discussion going into whether or not college is a scam, and specifically brings up an interesting point of Marbury versus Madison, which I was actually not too familiar with either. And by too familiar with, I couldn't have given a good description, just prior to, a few days ago, a couple of days ago, or whatever it was when I went back and watched this. But let me expand it and let's take a look.
They first know the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the Federalist Papers.
We learned that in high
Marbury.
school.
Okay, so what is Marbury versus Madison?
I haven't been in high school for a really long time. I'm
Well, I
not
thought
trying to
you
be a
said you
lawyer.
learned it.
Yeah.
So
I mean, high schools are like, it's public high
What was
school.
Brown versus the Board of Education?
That's for desegregating schools.
Okay, good.
Yeah, which Project 2025 wants to like defund the
Right.
Department of
So
Education.
who wrote the Constitution?
Founding Fathers, 1778. I don't know.
It wasn't 1778.
I don't know.
Close, yeah.
Yeah.
You don't know?
No.
Okay. Well, this is the point: is that you don't learn it in high school. You don't even learn it in undergraduate, and our law school is not learning it. So maybe.
Well, I'm not in law school.
No, the point is that you were saying they already learned it, and they don't. I don't want this to be a pop quiz or trivia. I didn't go to college, and I'm asking you very basic civic questions, and you're paying to go to college, and you can't answer them.
That's so fair, but I think.
Yeah, and again, this goes back to really Roe v. Wade could be argued that has a tie-in here where for those not familiar, and to make sure I'm not getting it wrong, using any incorrect wording. So Marbury versus Madison established the Constitution as law, where previously it was ideals and policies that law should be based around, and gave the judicial branch the ability to invalidate laws that were deemed unconstitutional, as we saw with Roe v. Wade that was overturned by the Supreme Court, right? I guess touching on that, where I've often heard the argument, well, Trump is taking away our reproductive rights, our reproductive freedom, and not allowing us to get an abortion, making it more difficult to use IVF, which that is just blatantly not true. He was actually a big supporter of IVF. And actually, it's kind of interesting if you look at Nicole Shanahan, Robert Kennedy Jr.'s running mate, used to be a big IVF advocate and then has kind of maybe not done a 180, but kind of backed off the advocacy of IVF as it's not, the miracle treatment or procedure as it's often thought to be. But in any case, maybe, and I would say maybe not arguably more importantly, I would say definitely more importantly, the Marbury versus Madison case ended up leading to the infamous Dred Scott versus Sanford case, which, if you don't know by name, deemed the Missouri Compromise unconstitutional and essentially led to the series of events where Abraham Lincoln got elected and started the Civil War. And the crux of the issue there was whether or not a person that was owned as a slave would be freed if they were brought into the newly purchased Louisiana Purchase territory. And so that was a case where Dred Scott was a slave, a person that was enslaved, and Sanford, I forget his first name, but it was his brother-in-law that actually owned Dred Scott. And so that was really, again, the crux of the issue where the U.S. Supreme Court actually overturned the Missouri Compromise as unconstitutional, meaning that people that were owned by slaves, even if they were brought into the Northern Free Territory, actually wouldn't be given their freedom, as it was kind of stated in law. And Abraham Lincoln actually then reversed that, and that was really what kicked off the Civil War, or at least a big, not proponent of it, but a big catalyst of it. And then another aspect of this conversation I want to touch on is the objectivity versus subjectivity. And again, this does go back to the morality of or versus legality of delivering a baby from a case of rape, but in a different sense where, what's a man, what's a woman? Is that objective? Is that subjective? I would say, the very easy way of looking at it, and I think, quote unquote, the right way of looking at it are looking at chromosomes, right? You have XX, XY, and then in the very rare case, you have a weird XXY or XYYY, and you have hermaphrodites. But I think it should be clear for everyone this day and age, you're either just playing pretend or you're delusional or, some sort of schizophrenic. Willing to have those conversations if you disagree, but I think it's very black and white in a case like that where I would say, perception is reality in a lot of cases, right? That, people can look at the same information and have a totally different understanding or interpretation of what they're looking at. But again, just got to take it by a case basis and, think, hey, is this a hill that's worth dying on by saying, anyone that just chooses to identify as a woman can be a woman? Personally, that's not the hill I'm willing to die on. But let's take a look at this clip as well.
Black?
That's how we define it in society, no shit.
Okay, got it. So, but is there an objective definition of who is black?
Wait, language is all subjective. Linguistics professionals indicate it's subjective.
Language is all subjective.
Yes, absolutely.
Oh,
Every
really?
word you just used was created by other human beings that are engaging in conversation.
No, now
you
we're
might think it's created by God, but even then it's still
Got
subjective.
it. But now
because it came from
we're
God.
getting somewhere.
God's a
So
subject.
now we're getting somewhere. Is the word and the value behind murder objective or subjective?
Well, I think morality is subjective. But you think it's subjective
is.
too
So,
because it comes
hold on.
from God.
That's interesting.
Wait,
So-
does it come from God or independent of God?
Well, no, of course it comes from God. It's
If
transcendent.
that's true,
it's
that's
transcendent
subjective.
human beings.
That's
No, it's not.
subjective. Yes, it is.
No.
If it comes from God, it's specifically subjective. If it comes independent of God, then it's objective.
No,
what
it's
you just told me
God-
is
God is
also
objective
compatible
morality.
with moral anti-realism.
So let's go back to the Ten Commandments.
So, and this is where I start to differ with Charlie Kirk. I don't think there is such thing as an objective God. I think the best way I've ever heard it framed is man created God. God did not create man. And I do think of God in the sense of existence, right? And this is kind of talked about in the Christian sense as well, being omnipresent, omniscient, omnipotent. And I look at that like we're all products of God, not just as people, but as any living being, or even, as crazy as this may sound, like the tablecloth, the table. I mean, we're all really just stardust, all part of really one larger being in existence, right? And I think if you look at God that way, yeah, you could say there is an objectivity to it, not one that I think us as humans will ever come to understand. But otherwise, we by and large do live in a subjective reality. You make life of it what you will, right? If, I don't believe in this objective hell or heaven, it's, again, you make life of it what you will. If you want to make your life a living hell, very easy to do that. If you want to make your life living heaven, more power to you. I think that was a big believer of what Charlie Kirk was doing, even though he also probably thought about, heaven in a more traditional sense in the afterlife. But in any case, I don't want to get too caught up in, transports. I think that's been, the horse has been beaten with the stick. The dead horse has been beaten over with the stick, more times than really should even be in the public spotlight. But going back, I do want to get back to the Marbury versus Madison case and talk about how that didn't just lead to the Dred Scott case, or even as we had just talked about, the Roe versus Wade case, but this also leads all the way up to U.S. versus Nixon, which this was the case where which led to Nixon's impeachment post the Watergate scandal, or as a result of the Watergate scandal, which again, just a little bit of context there. Originally, Watergate was not something that Nixon was a part of. And this was members of his campaign team or associated with his campaign team for his reelection to actually hide listening devices within the DNC's headquarters. And then how Nixon got roped into that was to cover it up, and that's what led to the Watergate scandal coming out. Oh my God, Nixon's in on spying of one of our own two parties, and then, didn't get impeached in the sense that he was actually forced down. He stepped down, he resigned, which I think is one of the biggest tragedies this country has seen. But I want to bring that up as he had some interesting thoughts that kind of tie back into today's political commentary around Israel. And before I do that, I also wanted to make a few more comments about the framing of the Constitution, as Charlie Kirk had brought up previously. I just thought this was interesting information that maybe not everyone has off the top of their head, or at least not, kind of current in what they're thinking about. With the writers of the Constitution, the first assembly was in 1785 at Mount Vernon, which will be there soon, to address the rights, the navigational rights of waterways between the early states of the Union. I think it was really just between Virginia and Maryland at that time. And then fast forward nearly a couple years later, it wasn't until May 14th of 1787 where there is the first constitutional convention. And due to no quorum, it was actually postponed 11 days. So literally the founding of our country didn't even get enough buy-in, where there was months and months and months in advance, people, representatives from each state that were committing to come up to this session, and then not enough people showed up to actually be able to start dictating what our Constitution would actually entail until 11 days later. It's like, hey, we're expecting all these people, and where are you all? And then 11 days later, May 25th, 1787, the first constitutional convention actually takes place. And then fast forward another few months, the first constitution actually was signed September 17th, which I just found out. Also, the day that I covered in our previous podcast, or at least previous solo podcast, was the date that the Star Spangled Banner lyrics were first published in the defense of Fort McHenry. So that poem. So I thought that was kind of an interesting tidbit of history. But going back to Nixon, I do want to cover this video here. This was one of his last public interviews, if not his last public interview. And again, I think very topical still today, 33 plus years later, his stance on Israel that you don't really hear people talk about.
In your book, and you say that you have said it many times when you were president of the United States, that no president is ever going to desert Israel, right?
Correct. I put it more bluntly. I said, as I told congressional leaders during the 1973 Yom Kippur War, no American president will let Israel go down the tube.
All right.
Democrat or Republican, it's not an issue.
That is stated fairly categorically, and yet in your book you make it clear at the same time that Israel really is not of any enormous strategic value to the United States anymore.
That's correct.
So why then would the United States continue to burden itself with huge loans, in some cases outright grants, to the Israelis, jeopardize possibly young American fighting men, when there is no strategic value involved, or little strategic
Because the
value?
United States is concerned by more than strategic values. That's maybe a weakness, but it's the way we are. And there are moral issues involved here. We don't have an alliance with Israel, as you know. They're not an ally of the United States in a technical sense. But we have a bond to Israel that
I'd say that's less so true now, both economically and militarily. I would say they're more of a technical ally, more at parity than pretty much any other, Western country, if you will. I think you see more technological advancements coming out of Israel. Again, both, on the military, Department of Defense, government side, as well as in the commercial field, given a lot of those commercial investments, do translate over to the military. I think that is something that has actually progressed in Israel's favor. And if they continue to be our ally, we continue to be their ally, benefits the United States as well.
it's much stronger. It's a moral commitment because of what happened during the Holocaust, and a moral commitment because it is a democracy, the only democracy in that area. And under the circumstances, that is why American presidents and the American people in the future will support all out the survival of Israel if it's attacked.
You've always been a very tough, pragmatic man.
So he talks, about the morality of defending Israel, even when they might not have strategic value, even though, again, I think that's evolved over time since then, and they've been able to provide more strategic value, not just in the way that he's talked about, but also in the sense that the Iron Dome, that's a very, popular, at least previously, was more popular as a marvel of engineering that was co-developed with Israel, with a lot of American funding. And yeah, you could absolutely not be in support of Israel, not in support of, funding Israel's like federal healthcare programs or, many other initiatives, but at the very least, when it comes to the Iron Dome, which has been, the cause of billions of dollars that the United States has sent over, I think that's money well spent in the sense that it's a lot better to test out those defense systems, being able to shoot down oncoming missiles when you're having to protect people, of another country, and we're not, putting those defensive systems on the line with our own people. In jeopardy. So as much as that may be a tough pill to swallow, I think that's a harsh reality of, finding allies and having a presence, elsewhere in the world where it doesn't make sense in every case. But again, as Nixon was talking about, them being one of, if not still the only democracy still in the region, I think that's a big big part of us backing Israel and supporting them even still to this day. And then I've also heard Robert Kennedy Jr. Talk about this, and I think he makes a good point where you look at a lot of these other Middle Eastern countries, even going into parts of Africa, even parts of Asia, Eastern Europe, you'll have government religions, right, where the official religion of said country is Islam, or you have to be Muslim, and it's not even just like this is the official religion, like, hey, the official language of the United States is English, but you can also speak other languages. You don't necessarily have to speak English, legally speaking. I do think it's kind of telling that you can have all of these other countries in the region that like will force you and like persecute you, persecute you, not prosecute you, for having different religious beliefs. Yet, Israel, they don't even make Judaism their national religion. You can be practicing any religion in Israel, and I think that's another stance from a morality perspective that we should take. It's one that we hold dear in this country, even though I think we have gotten away from separation of church and state. I do think that's something also maybe Charlie Kirk and I would disagree on, where I think he would be more of a proponent of a traditional Christian nationalist nation. I don't think we should have Christianity anywhere, involved in our politics. And I've heard him make comments about that the whole founding of America was based on the Bible. And I don't think that that's true in the slightest. Yes, there are some tie-ins, but again, not a hill that I would care to die on, so to speak. And I think there are far more important ideals than, those that were of really more of a Protestant value framework. Because really, you got to think a lot of the founding fathers coming over from Great Britain or the UK were freeing or fleeing the Catholic Church, fleeing religion that was like not necessarily forced upon you, right? But at least publicly so, right? And a lot of founding fathers were either deist in a more like vague sense, like they didn't like prescribe to an organized religion, and there's some that weren't even deist whatsoever. So that's where I think, again, Charlie Kirk and I kind of diverge. I think as far as, a morality perspective, he's amongst the greatest humans that have been, publicly outspoken of the last decade or so at the very least. But at the same time, everyone has their faults in their thinking, and he was certainly no exception. But yeah, getting back to Nixon on Israel, I want to play a little bit more of this clip, which is, I think, one of the more enlightening or intriguing aspects of this interview that I had watched. And I really wasn't expecting it because it's not something that I've ever really heard talked about in the news, even over the last few years, where all the conversation around the war between Israel and Hamas or Palestine has taken place really predominantly, since October 7th a couple years ago. But yeah, let's go ahead and play this.
And I just wonder if you were the president of Israel and you heard Richard Nixon talking that way, or for that matter, heard any sitting American president talk that way, and say, but there's really no strategic value anymore, how much faith would you place in that kind of a moral commitment if push really came to shove?
If I were the president of Israel, I put a great deal of faith in it because of the track record of the United States, and also because he would know that that is the way the American people are. There is no doubt whatever of our commitment to Israel.
Although you referred, Mr. President, to the track record. The track record was established at a time when the Soviet Union tended to be allied with Israel's enemies, with the Arab world. And we're not worried about the Soviet Union anymore in that sense. The Soviet Union doesn't exist anymore. Therefore, haven't things changed appreciably in the Middle East? And then we'll use that to get into the Soviet Union.
Well, at the present time, we could be thankful for the fact that this is the best opportunity in 40 years to make the right kind of a deal in the Middle East, because the Soviet Union no longer is going to poison the deal as they would have previously and have in virtually every previous crisis that we've had. The Iraqis have been taken out of the play. The Egyptians were taken out by Camp David. The Saudis are now being at least not unhelpful. So under the circumstances, this is the time for Israel to make its deal. It also should make its deal now for another reason.
Really quick, and before he gets into that reason that I wanted to address, Israel is not a perfectly run country by any stretch of the imagination, I would say. A lot of the problems with the country really stem from its current leadership and leadership over the last 20 years. And a lot of that has been under Netanyahu, where he's not exactly the most ideal person to represent democracy, as he's essentially been an Israeli emperor for the better part of the last 20 years. Given they have elections, you can argue how free and fair those are. And they require military service. That seems awfully against the whole my body, my choice movement that I think most people agree with if you actually think it through beyond just abortions, right? You look at it from a terms of military service, having to sign up for a draft or getting drafted. And then, like I mentioned, testing weapons, I think that's a no-brainer for us, right? Much rather test out defensive weapons on people outside of America than Americans, because ultimately, yes, you can test them with no lives, but when push comes to shoves, is it going to work in actuality? Again, tough pill to swallow. I think that's where Israel can really benefit from our support in that regard, and vice versa. But the most interesting part about what Nixon brings up is actually if Israel has nuclear weapons or not. So let's actually get into that.
Israel at the present time is the only nation in the area that has atomic weapons. Others are going to get them. Therefore, it's better for Israel to make the deal now rather than waiting till later. Because while Israel would be responsible insofar as the use of weapons are concerned, use them only in defense, some of the crazies out there might not be responsible. And that's why for Israel, for the United States, it's important for us to make this deal rather than waiting until later when they would be looking down our throats.
You state that categorically, that the Israelis have atomic weapons. You know they have never admitted it publicly. You stated, as a former president of the United States, you must know what you're talking about.
I'm not going to divulge any of my so-called secret information and so forth, but I will say this, that if I were an Israeli, I wouldn't indicate that I had them, and I wouldn't indicate that I didn't have them. But let me say, most experts in the area assume that they haven't. And as long as they assume that, that's enough.
But you don't qualify.
Because the Israelis will use them.
You didn't qualify it here this evening, and you didn't qualify it in your book. You stated it categorically in your book also, and I'm sure
Because
you were
I
very
believe
careful.
I believe, based on what I know, that that is the case.
All right, Mr. President, we're going to take another break.
So again, this was 1992, and again, there's 5 years between 1992 and when I was born in 97, and then, call it another 10, 15 years at least that I wasn't totally involved with political news. And, obviously there's still going to be information, lots of it, that I'm misinformed on or not informed on. But I've just never heard this as a talking point as to whether or not Israel has nuclear weapons. And to Ted Koppel's point, it's like, or I think it was actually Richard Nixon, you wouldn't want to speak out against it, right? You're either just going to put a bigger target on your back, or it's really not going to provide any value other than just knowing that you have them from a weapons of mass destruction, sort of mutually assured destruction sort of agreement, right? So I think this all ties back to Charlie Kirk again. Actually, the day before he was assassinated, and of course there was, the tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist out there saying, "Oh my gosh, he talks about Israel and then he gets shot." Did Mossad get him? And not saying that's impossible. I don't think that's the case, but obviously more information can and likely will come out over that situation. But let me go ahead and play this clip here.
How do you respond to that, Ben?
There's literally no definition of genocide by which Israel is committing a genocide. Typically, a genocide involves the targeted killing of the vast majority of the population, or at least an attempt to do so. There has never been a genocide attempted in world history in which the food that was being shipped in was more than the daily caloric intake of the average American into the areas where you're supposedly attempting to genocide the population. The total population loss in the Gaza Strip thus far has been 3%. During the Holocaust, just to take a reference, it was 50%. During Rwanda, it was significantly higher than 3%. You don't issue leaflet warnings to people. You don't go house to house in a genocide in an attempt to reduce civilian casualties. I understand that people use genocide at this point to just mean thing I don't like. And I get that. I understand. Nobody likes war. Nobody wants war. Certainly not the Israelis, who are not at war on October 6th. The fact is that every Israeli family has to send their 18-year-old son or daughter off to the military with the possibility that they're going to get blown up in Gaza. That is not something that any Israeli wants, right, left, or center. The real question is whether the accusations are accurate. They certainly are not, again, by any stretch of the imagination.
Ben Shapiro, author of Lying.
So, yeah, here Charlie was just asking, one of the questions that he's often asked, Charlie is often asked, is, well, aren't they committing a genocide, they being Israel? And I think Ben Shapiro, very clearly unbiased here, right? Definitely not a Jew himself. But no, even the biasness aside, right? I think if you do look at it by the data, as so many people, want to do, and, totally just actually disregard what they're seeing with their eyes, whether it's their own eyes or through video. And yes, obviously now, especially more so than ever, video can be altered. But I think it is very disingenuous to say what Israel is doing is anywhere close to genocide, and not just trying to take out a terrorist group in Hamas, or take out, another governing body that, you could argue has the rights to the land. But, as the saying goes, land is only yours if you can defend it, right? And as much as I would hate to see the day that we're having to do that in the United States, Ben also brings up lots of great points. You hear it elsewhere, you can see it elsewhere, you can see documentation published by both our government as well as other more neutral, if you will, nonprofit bodies, or even maybe even other for-profit bodies, that just the amount of humanitarian aid that we send into Gaza, to not to not just support, the refugees, the Palestinians there, but actually help them develop that land, right? And I just don't think, unfortunately, the leadership that was elected, part of Hamas, is going to let that happen, right? You see the top, I don't know how many leaders are still alive. I think at one point recently there was 8, and of those 8, I think 5 were billionaires and the others were like multi-hundred millionaires, and taking the humanitarian aid funding that we send over that's supposed to be going into feeding the Palestinian people, helping them develop Gaza into a region much like the rest of Israel, which again, if you look compared to the most of the Middle East, other than, a few places like Riyadh and Saudi Arabia, where again, like any big city, you're going to have some not so great parts of it, or like the UAE, Qatar, some of the bigger cities, almost futuristic, right? But then you look at an overwhelming majority of these countries' populations, and it's abject poverty, no real rights or freedoms, at least in the way that we think about them here in the U.S. And Israel, again, is probably the closest country that is in the region that lives up to those same sort of ideals, or at least looks to live up to those same sort of ideals. And so all this is just to, again, kind of remember Charlie Kirk to some degree. Again, not that I was and still am some big supporter. I think I would much rather have him here on this planet than not. I think that should go without saying. But it is unfortunate that we do live in this time where he wasn't even running for political office, just a guy with a microphone, so to speak, able to build up a good enough following just on the merit of what he had to say, willing to have a conversation with anyone. And, I think that's what we need more of in this country, willing to have conversations with other people, even when you may not have the most well thought out opinion. The other person has a more well thought out opinion. They still may just be trying to win an argument as part of a debate, and not just have a genuine conversation, trying to, find common ground, common understanding. But I think we can all agree, right? As whatever his name was, Thomas, took matters into his own hands to silence Charlie Kirk. The answer is not silence, right? It's through more information. It's through discourse. It's through conversation. And ultimately, right, if you really want to see the change that you're representing, you're speaking about, go run for political office. We live in a great country where that is a possibility, where it's not, pretty much everywhere else around the world, at least if you're looking at it by the numbers of people, right? So if you're one of the 300 plus million people here in America that, has a thought that you wish to, see more commonly portrayed or espoused, get yourself out there, right? You have a phone, more likely than not, a computer or access to one. And then if you're not getting it out there enough, take to the streets like Charlie Kirk did, right? You can go to public universities, have conversations with people just like he did. And, there's a lot of people that were saying, oh my God, I don't think he should have been killed, but he shouldn't have been espousing those sort of ideas, corrupting the youth, the minds of our youth. But it's like, again, what do you call college or any sort of organization? Even a business like we're running here. That's, at least a well-ran, business, right? And, working on growing ours to be more of a well-ran business is a cult, right? And so, yeah, Charlie Kirk did absolutely, like any person, have bias for what he wanted to see in the world. But again, it was built around kindness, compassion. I forget what the three words that he uses to describe like why church is good and not a scam, where college in his mind is at least more often than not a scam, unless you're going to become an engineer, a lawyer, a doctor, and you can make arguments, especially on the engineering side, at least if you're not going for like architectural sort of engineering, even the degree isn't needed there. But in any case, yeah, just wrapping this up, I hope everyone can, go away from this where you may not agree with everything I had to say or Charlie Kirk or Richard Nixon. Go out there and speak about what is on your mind, because I think for far too long, for now decades on end, we've had this idea of, well, you shouldn't talk religion, you shouldn't talk politics, you're gonna, step on people's toes. Well, otherwise, we're not going to have a country, in a couple of decades. And that might be hyperbolic and, potentially construed as fear-mongering. But I know I would much rather live in a country where people are talking to one another as opposed to, silencing one another, no matter, how that's done, right? Even if through violent means. So this has been another Autonomous Humanity podcast. Hope to see you, or you'll see us in the next one, and not sure exactly where that will be with a guest or not, but stay tuned and you'll find out.